So, Michael, if you would just to kind of get us started here, tell us a little bit about how you came to the decision to run for public office and what experience you bring to the treasurer's office.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first, I want to thank all of you for joining and the opportunity to sit down with you guys and tell you why I feel like I'm the best suited candidate for the Dubuque County Treasurer role. So, a little background on myself. I got born and raised in Dubuque County. Graduated West Dubuque, graduated in 1995 from West Dubuque. Went to the University of Northern Iowa. I played football up there under Coach Allen from 95 to 98. Left there in 98, joined the Marine Corps, stood on the Yellow Footprints in 1998, May 1998 out in San Diego. Left there, spent 8 years in the Marine Corps, made my way back to Dubuque in 2006. Did a tour over in Iraq and from 2005 to 2006. Then my 8-year mark was up and had to make the decision, do I want to stay in the Marine Corps? Do I want to get out? And ended up making the decision to come back home to Iowa. So came back home in 2006. I had got my bachelor's degree from Clark right before I had deployed. So my bachelor's in communications, came home and started working in the private sector at that time. So I've worked in the private sector for over 15 years. Most recently, I'm assistant vice president in the commercial banking world here at Dubuque Bank and Trust. Really just working with small to middle-sized businesses, really just understanding what their business needs are, their business models, and how I can help them in the financial world, essentially. In 2017, I had an opportunity to go back to school. I had some GI Bill money sitting there, so I went to the University of Dubuque, got my master's in business administration, graduated in 17, and then when I finished doing that, they had asked if I had ever considered teaching, and I looked at them and I said, no, I'd never really considered teaching, but I had some really great instructors when I was going through the master's program, and it was at that time when I thought, you know what, better way to give back to students by being able to go back and teach. And so currently I'm an adjunct up at University of Dubuque. I teach principles of microeconomics, macroeconomics, principles of management, and I'll be teaching a new class this fall. I'll be teaching principles of selling. So I also serve
principles of what?
Principles of microeconomics, macroeconomics, principles of selling, and then principles of management. Okay. Yeah. So that'll be the new one that I'm teaching this fall. So, and then as far as why I think from a candidate perspective or why I decided to run, it was one of those things where I ran for school board, Western Dubuque School Board back in 19. I ran against Jessica Pape, who's obviously the incumbent president, and knew it was going to be a long haul to try to unseat her, but it was the first time my name was on a ballot, and did it and lost. And as a Marine, we don't like to lose a lot of things, and so it was a punch in the gut, and so we just kind of put a pin in it at that time and thought, we'll see what happens. And then when everything kind of happened back in January with the treasurer role here in Dubuque County, I had a few people approach me about it and asked me, have you ever thought about running for treasurer? And I said, God, no, I've never thought about it before. And started doing some research on my own and started realizing that, what that role really entails lined up very nicely with my background from the leadership perspective in the Marine Corps, my finance background with the bank, so a lot of different things really filled the bill for me. And so it was at that time, sat down with the wife and made the decision that, now is a really good time to help serve the community in that role. So.
Okay. Well, we know we've got your opponent who's running has worked in that office and talks a lot about that. So when you are talking with constituents about this, what do you think is the benefit of fresh eyes versus the experience of the office, and what's your understanding of kind of how the day in, day out of the office works?
So I think the biggest thing with the treasurer role is you're serving the community, right? It's probably the most front-facing department that the county has. You're serving the most amount of people face to face. And so I think number one, it's about being able to serve the community and how can you serve the community the best. And so if you're able to put that together on how you can do that, so like I said, serving the constituents. Number two is creating a positive work environment. So how do it's for all staff, right? And so how do you create the positive work environment? Number one, lead from the front. So pull from the Marine Corps background is, I was taught very early on, you lead from the front. If you know how to do it, you can teach your junior Marines how to do it. And so it's learning every aspect of that role, from the current staff, reaching out to other county treasurers and how they treat their staff and how they handle staff and what they need to do. So it's reaching out to them. On top of that, working in the private sector, it's recognition for work, right? And I don't know if that's something they're currently doing, but it's definitely, when working in the private sector, it's recognizing the work that's performed. And if you're able to do that, you're going to continue to create that positive work environment. I think on top of that, set the expectations. You have to be able to set the expectations within the department for each employee, because if they don't know what the expectations are, it could create animosity. It could create different dynamics and a culture that maybe people within that office might not like or want. Team collaboration and ownership is another piece. When I've always worked off the premise, especially even when I was in the Marine Corps and then working in the private sector, when I was managing about 15 people at a private firm here in Dubuque, it was giving them tasks and letting them run with it. And so when there's an identified issue or concern, okay, how do you handle it? Well, let's put together a small team. What do you guys think? Put your heads together, try to come up with a formula on how you can fix it. So there's ownership on their part. So it's real. You start creating that collaboration amongst the team members, let them own it. And then if there are items that need to be changed or new efficiencies that could happen, it's letting that team own it. So there's ownership amongst the staff, amongst the elected role, i.e. the treasurer. And then I think to summarize that then is facilitate opportunities for learning. Even if, there's clerks that work down there, but I think there's always opportunities for all of us to learn. Even me with, having a master's, there's still stuff I learn every single day. Talking to customers every day, I learn about their environment, their industries, what struggles they have. Same thing happens down there. I mean, there's, when I talk to constituents in the county, it's about how can they come in and get their stuff done the fastest possible, get them in, get them out, because a lot of them are coming down over their lunch breaks and they don't want to stand in line. And so are there different opportunities to create efficiencies? And so I think from the private sector, being able to come in and look at it from a different point of view and not having worked for the county for 18 years gives me an opportunity to say, I've got a different set of eyes. I can look at it differently. And maybe everything is great. Maybe everything is working as efficiently as possible. But being able to have a different set of eyes on it. I mean, there's reasons that even counties, states, private sectors, they all hire consultants, and they hire consultants for a reason. It's so that they can get a different set of eyes on it and possibly come up with different efficiencies. So I think coming from the outside looking in is more advantageous than having worked in that environment for so long that I can provide different set of eyes and different point of view and be able to give different advice or opportunities that may come along for different efficiencies to help things move along a lot faster.
So you supervise a staff of folks now in your current role?
In my current role, I don't. When I started at DD&T, when I was hired back in 2018, I was hired as a branch manager, so I was managing 2 of the branches for the bank, and so I managed about 15 at that time. And then about a year after that, then I transitioned into my commercial role. So now in my current role, I don't manage anybody, but then before I came to DD&T, I worked at Hardig Drug. I worked in their long-term care pharmacy division, and I managed about 15 people there as well.
And do you know what the staffing level is in the treasurer's office?
To be honest with you, Amy, I'm not 100% sure. Last I've heard was between 15 and 20, but I don't know exact numbers, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
And I think that includes the deputy treasurers along with the clerks.
Okay. And when it looks like you've been out and about doing campaigning. I've seen, signs and t-shirts. I've seen you've been involved in some events and things. When you've had opportunity to talk with Dubuque County residents, do they know what the treasurer does? Do they have opinions, or what's their, what do you think people will be basing their vote on just out talking with folks?
Yeah, so that's usually that's usually the first thing I ask people is, do you know what the treasurer does or the treasurer's office does? And they usually, well, they take my money. That's usually the response that I get. And so it's educating them, right? It's educating them that it's motor vehicle registration, it's property tax collection, it's those different things. And, those are the two main duties. But I mean, if you look at the state code, there's 36 general duties in the state code for the treasurer and what they're supposed to be doing on any given day. And so, I go back to, it's mostly the public that you're encountering, and how can we do that again most efficiently? So to answer your question, what am I hearing from most of the people? It's how can it become more efficient? One of the things is the Dyersville office. I live out in Dyersville, and so why is the Dyersville office not open all the time? And it's like, well, maybe it doesn't, the amount of people that would go to that office doesn't support it being open. And I know that office is open, I think, Tuesday through Thursday by appointment only. So there's opportunities for people to visit it, and I've used that office before as well. And so, and that's a great partnership with the city of Dyersville, because we're able to be in that building rent free, and so it doesn't cost the county anything. But we're able to give that opportunity for constituents on that side of the county to be able to come visit that office. And so those are different things I think you can look at. Maybe it doesn't support being open all the time just from a staffing level, but I think if you look at those different things and start to realize, well, maybe one day a week you can say, hey, we're going to be open this day. But again, it's getting to that office and really evaluating those things and taking a look at it and really determining, does the level of constituents that would visit that office support it being open more frequently? So
Okay.
does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yep. No, you're good. I just, curious. It's one of those things that one of those offices you wonder what really goes into it for the voter, or if partisanship is dictating who they're more likely to vote for. And whether, I guess, does this even need to be a partisan office? Does it seem that way to you?
Well, and I think you guys hit the nail on the head when you had your editorial piece that came out. I think it was back in March. I think you wrote specifically about that, county positions and should they be partisan. And I've always said, from my perspective in the treasurer role, I've said no, because it's zero policy making from the treasurer's level. I think that again, people are going to make that decision based off of when they go to the polls, whether there's a D or an R behind your name, unfortunately. And that's, so when you talk about conversations that I have, it's about my background and how I feel like I'm the best qualified candidate for the role with my background. Having, again, I go back to the leadership perspective from the Marine Corps and be able to lead people from the front, and then my financial background and being able to understand those concepts quickly. Now, do I know how the office works currently day in and day out? No, but can I pick that stuff up pretty quickly? Yeah. And so it's on top of having the education level and the financial background to be able to understand that stuff very quickly, to be able to jump into that side of it. And then again, I go back to being able to really motivate the people and the staff. You've got to have, and from what I understand, there's going to be some staff turnover at the end of the year already. And that was already planned before anything was announced. But so you're going to have some staff turnover. You're going to have new staff that comes in, and so it's working with those employees that currently are there. Create the culture and the environment in which they want to come to work every day, and be able to help those new employees that are coming on board and get them up to speed as quickly as possible. And the way that you do that is me personally being able to learn as quickly as possible, learn the roles day in and day out, and be able to help those new employees as well.
Okay, thanks. I'll let one of my colleagues jump in here.
Yeah, Michael, maybe elaborate a little bit more. I know you talked a little bit about leadership. I guess give some examples of times when you have had to take over a role, and you talk about leading from the front, but also having to get up to speed too. So basically leadership in a new situation where you may not be as intimately familiar with the current workings as others. How do you lead in that environment?
So I'll give you two examples, Bob. First example would be when I was in the Marine Corps in 2005, when we were over in Iraq and we lost our platoon leader. And so instead of getting a new officer to run our platoon, essentially we took our platoon sergeant, made him platoon commander, and then the 3 squad leaders that were within our squad became platoon sergeants. And so it was essentially a new role because you're running the whole platoon at that point. Instead of being in charge of 12 guys in my squad, essentially I was in charge of the whole platoon at that point. And so it was a great dynamic for us because we were able to learn above what really our pay grade was. As a sergeant that and a squad leader, I was able to learn from a whole platoon level and what that took in order to learn. What does it take to teach these guys day in and day out? And then on top of that, having the meetings for, planning and execution of our missions that we were going on. And so, when I was squad leader, it was more, here's what you need to do, dictate that to your Marines. Now, as a platoon sergeant, you're really helping dictate that role and what we're going to do, and then disseminate it to the squad leaders. And so that was a change. And then we also had opportunities because our platoon sergeant was a staff sergeant, and so he had us become platoon commanders at the same time as well. And so we were learning both of those roles, which really helped expand my knowledge base within, the Marine Corps world. And so that helped exponentially to be able to learn that. And the second example I'd give would be when I was working at Hardegg. I was the business development officer at Hardegg, and we had some turnover with our pharmacists. And so they ended up making me the general manager of operations and development. So when I took that role over, I had to learn more about because when I was in the initial role that I took on, it was more just business development. I was trying to find new business and maintain the current relationships we had. When I took over as GM, I really had to learn the function and role of the pharmacy techs because that's who I was managing. So I had to learn that role of them and learn what they were doing on a daily basis and how they did it. And by me learning that, I was able to help create additional efficiencies in their day-to-day work. It could be something as simple as moving something from here to here in the pharmacy that helped create the transition from this method to that method, and so it was without knowing what they were doing on a daily basis, I would have never been able to help create those new efficiencies. And so, just diving in and being able to learn, what they were doing on a daily basis and how I could create a better function. But at the same time, it was, doing that, but also, again, I go back to creating that culture and that positive work environment.
And just kind of as a follow-up to that, some people, would look at your background. I know you've had experience both in and outside the military and then private sector. And some people would look at the military and say, oh, that's a lot of great things come from that, self-discipline and so on, and order. Other people might say, well, the military is often a top-down organization where decisions and ideas come from the top down and get implemented, and so it doesn't fit as well in the private sector. I guess, how would you describe, giving both of those backgrounds, experience in both those backgrounds, how would you describe your leadership style?
So again, I go back to that leading from the front, and I was taught this at the time, it was Captain Prindiville, Lieutenant Colonel or 1-star. I'm not sure what he is now, or Colonel. I can't remember if he picked up as 1-star, but he was our captain. He was our platoon commander at the time when I was over in Iraq. And his method was, again, lead from the front, learn, because he would go on missions with us. He knew what we were doing on a daily basis. But at the same time, he was very well respected because he gave us those responsibilities. He gave us the ability, he gave us the ability to screw up, honestly. And when he gave us that ability, it was a teaching moment for him to teach us, hey, this is how you could have maybe done it better. And so that was part of it. And then when I did transition from the military into the private sector and was managing personnel, I had to develop some empathy. I did. I'll be honest with you. It was not a part of me that I had, and I had to really develop that part of me because the military side, yes, albeit like you said, gives you great things and assets, leadership and all those great traits it gives you, but at the same time, there's not a whole lot of empathy there, you know, in the military. And so I had to learn that trait, and I had to learn it very quickly. In order for people to really respect and follow you, you have to have that empathy, and you have that create that empathy and that respect by learning and managing to each individual person. And it's very hard to do. And I teach this in my management class, because you can't just say, this is how I manage and this is what I'm going to do. You really have to learn each individual person. And it could be something as simple as you have a quick conversation with somebody, says, oh, Johnny's got a baseball game tonight. You know, it's Friday night, and they go to the baseball or football game or whatever it is. Simply in passing on Monday, you say, how was the football game, or how was the baseball game? That you remembered something like that. And so it's little things like that where you create that empathy with them, and you create that respect, because they're like, oh, he actually cares about what's going on in my life. And so I had to learn that, to be honest with you, Bob. It was one of those things that I didn't have coming out of the military, and I had to learn it very quickly. And I feel like I do a very good job with it, because you have to learn, like I said, you have to learn and manage to each individual person. But at the same time, you also have to manage an office, right? And so there's that fine line that you have to kind of walk with managing each person, but also managing the office at a holistic level as well.
Thanks.
So Michael, as was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of people who don't really know what the treasurer does. But I think it'd be fair to say that a lot of people, while they may not know what the treasurer does, it's well documented what happened at the beginning of this year with the previous county treasurer. And so I suspect that's caused a lot of pain and suffering as far as credibility to that office. So I'm wondering, what if you were elected, what would you see as the priorities in the first, say, 3 to 6 months that you would have to do to restore the credibility to that office?
Thanks for the question. I would say for me, top priority would be a couple different things. And I don't think it can happen in 3 to 6 months. You can obviously start to implement it, but I don't think it can happen that quickly. But first and foremost, it's 3 things. It's transparency, visibility, and accountability. And so when I say visibility, and a great example was that we have two older daughters, a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old, and a son that just graduated from West Dubuque, and then an incoming freshman. And they're all part of the campaign. They go on the campaign trail with us. They're out at parades. They go to events, and we were going to an event on Saturday. And the oldest daughter, the 22-year-old, she said, Dad, when you get elected in November, she goes, will you continue to go to these events? And I said, actually, we'll probably be going to more events. And she's like, well, why is that? And I said, going to these events now to get elected is great, but continuing to go to the events after you get elected are probably more important, because you have to be visible in the community. And if you're visible in the community, you start to build the trust. And it's just like I say here at work at DB&T in my role, it's about relationships. I can go knock on a door and ask somebody, hey, we want you to bring your business to DB&T. And they'll look at me and be like, I don't trust you. I don't know you. And so it's building that relationship. And so I think it starts with building the relationship with number one, your employees down there. And so how can you do that quickly? And then it's building that trust and that relationship outside of the office and in those communities. And the way that you do that is to go to those events that are out in the communities so that they can see you. And if you're visible in those communities, you're going to start to build the trust, and they're going to realize that you actually care about those communities. And so once they start to trust you and they see you're visible, inherently you're going to become approachable. And if you're approachable, they're going to start to come to you. They're going to say, hey, I had an issue with this, or hey, you're doing a great job, or whatever it is, right? Good and bad. But I think if you don't do that, you can't mend that trust, and you can't mend that fence. That's I mean, quite honestly, it's been happening in most of the county offices currently across the board. I mean, you guys know it, you report on it. So it's one of those things. And I think all of us as elected officials, it's our duty to be out in the community, to be seen, and allow our constituents to be heard. And I think that's how you start to do it, Mike. That would be what I would start to implement. And again, I don't know if it could happen in 3 to 6 months, but it would happen day one. But hopefully through those measures, you would start to see that there would be some trust levels that would start to be broken, like start to build up, and those issues that they've had would start to kind of be broken down.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sort of in, you know, maybe sort of as a similar vein of the previous question. So, you know, you talked about kind of your visibility in the community as well as, you know, and kind of that community trust aspect. I'm interested in with there's been, you know, within the department itself, there's been a lot of change in leadership with Eric Stearman stepping down, and then the treasurer who was appointed for about a month, and now Denise Dolan is running the office. So within the office itself, there's been a lot of changes in leadership in the past year, and I'm interested in how you see yourself kind of stepping into that. You know, what do you see as your role? You know, in bringing what would hopefully be some, you know, if elected, some longer term leadership to that department.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I look at that as probably the single biggest issue right now is building that trust, internally, I think, and externally. And I mean, you guys are all aware. I think there's been a degradation of trust and teamwork from the county level, the state level, to the federal level. I mean, across all boards, right? And so I think it's a scary time right now. And really, I think it sits with each individual person. And when I say that, it's you guys. I mean, you're all voters, the people, the constituents out in the county. And it's me getting out there and educating them, like we've talked about in the last 30 minutes, talking about what the treasurer's office does, how we support the community, and how can we do that. And I think the biggest thing is, again, I go back to, I have to gain the trust of the employees first. I have to get their backing. You know, come November, if I get elected, I have to gain their trust. And how can I do that quickly? And again, it's creating that empathy and really, again, diving in, learning what I need to do, how to do it. And then once I start to do that, I think you can start to bandage some of the issues that have happened. But at the same time too, I think it's also working across the hall with the recorder, and it's working with the attorney, and it's working with the county sheriff, and it's working with all the county departments together in a collaboration. You know, and I go back to the private sector piece. I mean, here at the bank, we don't work in our little silos. I don't just work in the commercial world. When I go out on client visits, I take partners with me so that I can introduce them to other people that could potentially help them. If they can't help them, it's great, but at least they've got another contact at the bank. And I think it's the same thing on the county level. You start to work with different departments, and you can share best practices. You can collaborate on different things, and you can start to work together. And I think if you can start to do that, it starts to bring a more cohesive unit to the county offices. And, you know, but obviously those elected officials in those departments have to be willing to do that as well. So, but that would be something that I would definitely be willing and wanting to do, is collaborate across the board. You know, obviously, you know, with the supervisors, all of your county departments. I mean, you have to be able to work with them. And I think if you do that, it starts to create a cohesive, more cohesive unit amongst the county offices.
We always hear from candidates all the great things that they can do and how qualified they are for a position and why voters should vote for them. What would be the one area, Michael, that you feel like, okay, this is the area I'm really going to have to sharpen up my skills or better understand to move into this position?
I think for me, it's probably sitting down and really understanding from the state level what's pushed down to the county level. And so it's really diving into the code and the ordinances, and what does the state say, this is what you have to do in your office, and what is actually being done. And so I don't think that's going to happen until I'm able to get into that office, but I think that's going to be a little bit of a hurdle, is quickly getting up to speed onto what does the state say, hey, this is what you need to do, and this is what is actually being done in the office within its limits. And so once I'm able to, I think, understand those pieces and really know, okay, hey, the state says for our investment fund, this is where the funds can be put, and this is what is offered to you. Once you understand that, you can start to learn the other dynamics of it. I think you can start to get past that piece of it from a hurdle perspective. And again, I think it's utilizing the current staff that's there. because I hear great things about the staff that's down there, which is awesome. And so utilizing that staff and getting up to speed and really getting past that hurdle.
Thanks.
Another thing that we have editorialized about from time to time is whether there is an opportunity to do more sharing, whether that be between two counties, like we saw with the county engineer's position where Dubuque County shared an engineer with Delaware, or in some counties they have combined auditor and recorder, or is there a chance to combine treasurer recorder? And obviously nothing's happening right now. Is that something, and often the person sitting in the position pushes back hard against it, but do you have any thoughts about that, or how that might look, what that might look like statewide?
Yeah, I do. I think there's opportunities to be able to cross-train between specifically the recorder and treasurer's office. I think there's opportunities there. And again, that's getting in the office and sitting down with John and saying, hey, are there opportunities here where we can cross-train employees that could potentially help both offices? I think that would probably be the closest match, recorder and treasurer's office, because those two really are probably the most front-facing. And so are there opportunities there where you can cross-train both of those employees so that they have access to both? And God willing, we don't have another COVID instance that happens here in the next couple of years. But I mean, I think that was incredibly difficult for everybody, but specifically your county staff that was required to come into work. But given if we had people that were cross-trained, would it have been easier for the employees to be able to help in those different departments and continue to keep pushing forward? Not that they didn't, but were there other opportunities there? But those are things I think definitely, Amy, that need to be looked at. Are there specific situations where these departments can work together and intermingle between them both and cross-train employees to help serve the constituents of this county? And at the end of the day, that's what we need to do. And how can we do it most efficiently? And so I think that I'm definitely for it and willing to look at those things. And if we can create that dynamic where at the end of the day, in 4 years, we're able to implement something like that, I think it would be great.
Yeah. Have you had much opportunity to speak with folks that work in our county government now?
So I've, over the course of probably not so much now, back in May, June, and some of July, I met with pretty much every elected official, county, city, most of the city council members. So I was able to sit down with most of them and really just not necessarily pick their brains, but find out, hey, what's working well in your department? How do you work with the treasurer's department? And so that was several months ago, but I was able to sit down with most of the elected officials and have those conversations. It was more just to introduce myself, like, this is who I am, and this is what I stand for, and this is, my background, and then to learn kind of, what they're working on and what they're doing now. And yeah. I actually broke bread with Ann McDonough. We shared a lunch, so that was pretty awesome.
Did you hear anything in the course of those conversations that surprised you, or that maybe you didn't realize the treasurer's office was involved with?
No, I think from most of my conversations, because I think I said earlier, I've reached out to other county treasurers as well in different counties, and that was very early on when I was deciding, if I wanted to run. I reached out to some other county treasurers in different counties and asked, hey, what does this role look like for you? How long have you been in it? And so I already had some background from other county treasurers. And so a lot of the information that I was getting from people here locally, wasn't really surprised, and nothing really surprised me when I was getting information from them. It was all great stuff, and it's exciting to see what every department is working on. And I go back to that collaboration. Outside of having those conversations or sitting in a supervisor's meeting, hearing the different things that are going on, you might not know. And so I think that's why it's important to really stay invested in the different parts of the county and the different departments and really know what they're working on and what they're doing, because it can only help the constituents in this county.
You know, when we have these conversations with candidates, we often talk about how they'll communicate with constituents, how they'll get information back, get feedback, that sort of thing. It's a little different for this position, since as you noted, you know, you're not a day-to-day decision maker, policy setter, where you need to kind of hear the feedback from the constituents. So what role does a constituency play for the treasurer? Is that an important component for you to communicate with the citizens? And if so, what would you glean from that?
I think that's probably on top of setting the expectation and getting information from the current employees. I think that's probably right next to that is getting information from your constituents. And the information I think that you can get from them is, well, let's be honest. I mean, they're going to share the stuff that's not working mostly, right? That's the stuff they're going to share with you, is what's not working, which is great, because that's the stuff you want to hear. And it might be legitimate and it might not be legitimate. But if, again, I go back to being accessible, if you're not accessible to them in the communities and you haven't invested in their communities, and when I say invested, I mean going to the events that are happening, it's firemen's dinners or whatever it is, that they see you out in the community and they know that you're there and you support the different things that are going on in those communities. If you're there, you're going to be approachable. And if you're approachable, they're going to have those conversations with you. And so I think that information that you can glean from them is what's working and what's not working. And then it's things that you can take back to the office and have conversations with the staff and say, hey, I heard this over the weekend, or I heard this yesterday. Let's talk about, maybe, is there a different way to handle it? You know, and if there isn't, at the end of the day, it's going back to that constituent that had the conversation with you and following up with them and saying, hey, I took a look at this. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's working the way it's working. And so unfortunately we can't change it, you know? So I think the follow-up is another part too, is you got to follow back up with those constituents and let them know that you heard them and you took action, and this is the result of that action. Now, it's going to take a lot of time and effort, but I think that's the most important part. And I go back to what Mike was saying, his question earlier about how do you get that respect back from the community? And I think that's part of it too, is showing that you're not only willing to go out there and be part of the community, but you're also willing to listen and actually possibly implement those solutions if there are some.
You know, I think from airplanes to emergency rooms, we've heard more and more stories about escalation of, you know, irate customers, people's, you know, temperatures flaring and lashing out, violence, you know, against flight attendants, against emergency room nurses, you know, store clerks. Obviously, you know, in a public office like that can be a place where, you know, people's, you know, there may be people that are angry and dealing with customers like that. Do you have a sense of how secure the folks who work in the office feel, or whether, you know, we've gone kind of back and forth with some of the conceal and carry laws, and we still have the metal detectors in the courthouse, but do they have to go through that to get to the treasurer's office?
Yeah, I was down there last week. I bought a new vehicle and I had to go down there to update the title on the new vehicle. And so, yeah, I had to go through, and I had my suit on, and I had to take my belt off and all that good stuff to go through. Not that somebody can't get through there with something, but, you know, yes, the measures, I think the measures are in place to try to keep the courthouse as safe as possible. But that being said, I think there's still opportunities for people maybe that come through. And that's certainly something that if there are identified issues, that's hopefully, you know, Shane down there that runs the guards, or the sheriffs down there, can have a conversation with him and say, hey, there might be some identified opportunities here. But that being said, I think the easiest thing for me would be, again, it's knowing your employees and their level of feeling safe within the workplace. And if there's other things that need to be implemented to make them feel safe, that, you know, within reason, that we could do, you know. So if you have employees that don't feel safe, it's addressing that. Well, why don't you feel safe? You know, was there something that happened that you want to talk about? You know, so trying to get to that, the root cause of maybe why they don't feel safe, and if there are opportunities to maybe shore some of that up. I guess for me, when you talk about irate customers, it's one of those things where, again, it's understanding those employees. There's probably some employees that don't mind handling those irate customers, and there's probably some that would rather not deal with it. And again, it's knowing which employees within the staff would don't mind handling that, and the ones that wouldn't. And it's, if you know that there's one that's getting irate about something, and I'm standing there or I'm around, then I'll walk up and take care of it or handle it. And it's that just it's an easier way to mitigate it, or to make sure that the situation maybe doesn't escalate to where it doesn't need to. But I'm sure that there's people that go down to the treasurer's office irate about certain things, about property tax or whatever it might be, and how much they're paying. So I'm sure it probably happens. I would hate to say it, but probably happens on a daily basis, unfortunately. And so I think it's working with the staff and understanding which ones feel like they can handle it and which ones couldn't, and then being able to help out in those situations where you can.
Is there anything, we're getting close here to our allotted time. Is there anything that we haven't asked you about, or another point that you think would help us better understand where you're coming from in this this campaign?
No, I think just for me, again, I go back to just, for me, I feel like I'm probably the most qualified candidate, just with my financial background and, teaching up at the University of Dubuque. And then I guess one thing I did leave out and didn't mention earlier, but I also own a small business with my wife. We own a screen printing and embroidery business. And so, that being said, it's she runs kind of the day-to-day stuff, but I help her with more of the financial side. So I'm able to do some of the financials on the business, and I file the quarterly taxes and help her with those pieces, ordering of items. And so from a small business perspective, it's, when I look at what I've accomplished, it's again, I go back to what I said earlier. It's, when I decided to run, I looked at, what does the treasurer role do, and what are my accolades? And when I looked at those two, they really meshed well together. And that's why I can sit here and say I know I'm the most qualified candidate to run the office, and it's really just getting out in the community in the county and educating people on what the treasurer's office does and why I'm the most qualified candidate. So.
All right, great. And so wife and 4 kids, it sounded like, is that right?
Yeah, wife, and we've got a senior that starts. We had a busy weekend. We had the parade in Cascade, and we moved one of our daughters back to Augustana in Rock Island. She's a senior. We moved another one on Sunday to Madison. She's a junior at Edgewood. And then we had a son that graduated from West Dubuque this May, and he's a jailer down in Cedar County. He just started down there in July. And then we've got an incoming freshman at West Dubuque. So.
Oh, great. And any other volunteer work or social organizations or activities that you're involved with where you might have gained some leadership experience or experience that would pertain to this?
Yeah, so I served as the board secretary for SASE, the Substance Abuse Services Center in Dubuque. I served as their board secretary for, I think, 4 years, and then we just had a merger with ASAC out of Cedar Rapids, and so I'm transitioning from the SASE board. Obviously, we dissolved that board, and I'm transitioning onto the ASAC board. It won't be in the executive committee for that board, but I'm transitioning on that board to help support the staff that's still here in Dubuque, so that they at least have representation from a board member here in Dubuque. So I transitioning into that board. It's nothing's finalized yet there. And then I also serve on the business advocacy committee through the Dubuque Area Chamber of Commerce, which they look at the legislative priorities from the local perspective, the state level and the federal level, and look at the priorities that match up with the communities and what the chamber's trying to accomplish.
Okay, great. Well, Michael, we really appreciate your time meeting with us today. Thank you for your military service, and thank you for stepping up to throw your hat in the ring in the realm of public service for the county. So
Right.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you very much, all of you. I appreciate your time and look forward to talking soon again.
All right, take care.
Bye.